Hi. We have a special branch of chemistry that relates to the chemistry of life. When we think about life, if we're looking for life on Mars or some other planet, what do we look for? We look for carbon, because carbon is the backbone. It makes up all of the molecules of life. And I think we've said, that there's carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen are the main kinds of elements that are found in all life. I don't care if you're talking about a bacterium or a giraffe, or you and me, we're all basically made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. So why is that? It ends up that carbon, we had said, it has 4 outer electrons, and it needs 8. And so in order to gain stability, and so what it will do is it will share pairs of electrons with up to 4 different partners. And because of this, it allows it to build these really giant molecules. So you can develop into what we call macromolecules. And even beyond one carbon after another, you can even have like multiple carbon containing building blocks that are used to make these giant macromolecules. And when we talk about the chemistry of the 4 main types of organic molecules that make up what we call biomolecules, we're going to talk about them being carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Those are the 4 main kinds of organic molecules that are found in all living things. That's what we're made of. And it's all based on carbon. So these are bioorganic compounds. Now, so we start out, we're talking about carbohydrates and lipids. And they are made, we'd said, what is inside of you and I? We'd said you got your carbon, you got your hydrogen, you got your oxygen, and you got your nitrogen. Well, these 2, lipids and carbohydrates, they don't have any nitrogen. They only are made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. And interestingly, maybe not to you, but to me, interestingly, it ends up that with a carbohydrate, if you think of it as a C and a water, right? We'd said carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. So you got your carbon, and then you got your hydrogens and your oxygens, your water. Well, if you put a CH2O together, that is really and truly that is the formula that you find in carbohydrates. Now, sometimes it's like the classic carbohydrate that's in you and I would be something called glucose. And you know what its formula is? C6H12O6. So you see, if you do some math, you do some ciphering, if you do a little bit of math, you say 6 is half of 12, and then the 6 oxygen is 6 again, so it's C1H2O1 again. So you see that relationship. So that 2 hydrogens for every oxygen, that's a relationship that you can use to identify a carbohydrate. Now, I said there's this other one. There's this lipids. Lipids are fats. So what is a carbohydrate? Before I move on, carbohydrates are things like sugars And then there are bigger molecules that are like starches. And there are even other kinds of big molecules that you wouldn't think of as being a sugar, but would. Cellulose is a polysaccharide. It's a carbohydrate. Plus, even more interesting, that crackly shell on the outside of a bug, that's called chitin. It also is a carbohydrate. So these are some examples. So carbohydrates can be structural stuff, like that wood or that insect shell, but it's often energy, right? Okay, what is this other one? I said there's this other category of biomolecule that is made up only of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And it's something we call a lipid. And you would know it as a fats and oils. Fats and oils are lipids. And they consist of the same, only those three, that's all, only those three elements. But what's different? They have a different relationship between the number of hydrogens and oxygens. They have many fewer hydrogens to oxygens. So they do not have that H2O relationship between the hydrogens and the oxygens. But if you see only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and it's not in a 2 hydrogens for every oxygen relationship, you know what it is. It's a lipid. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so you see, and what is a lipid? So we'd said they're fats and oils. They're also, they're hormones, something called steroids. You know, they play these kinds of roles. That's their jobs. So they are, and they make up, even cell membranes are made of them. Because you know what's interesting? If you think about sugar, carbohydrate, so this is carbohydrate. If you put some sugar into your tea and you ding, 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 you know, stir it up, it'll go away. It'll dissolve, right? And what happens if you put olive oil in there and you go ding, ding, ding? Nothing. It's still on the surface, right? So the weird thing about lipids is they don't dissolve in water. Tea is water. But carbohydrates do, unless you're a big one, like a starch, a potato. Potato doesn't dissolve in water either. But lipids are what we call hydrophobic, which means that they don't get along so well with water, whereas carbohydrates, for the most part, do. All right. If you take carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, and you toss in a little bit of nitrogen, so you're looking at a formula, and you see carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, nothing else, you're probably looking at a protein. Proteins consist of those four atoms. Now it ends up, the building blocks of proteins, you do sometimes get some other stuff in there, but every protein consists of these four. Now, sometimes you get some sulfur in there. It's not as easy to tell apart as the carbohydrates and the lipids. I'll grant it. I'll admit that. And so what are they? These are structural, right? You got to have your protein to be strong. So there's all kinds of stuff. Muscles are made of protein. You know, even things like enzymes that cause chemical reactions to happen. So we don't talk much about that in here, but proteins, what do? They're made up of a building block called an amino acid, and they have a 3D shape, and they give cells, they give you structure, shape, things like that. One other, We have one other kind of biological macromolecule. It's the genomes. We all know we have DNA inside of us, right? Maybe you've had your ancestry checked out and you found out something remarkable. What's interesting with me is in my family, we always said we were kind of a mixture, but we had always said we were British, various kinds of British and German and Scotch-Irish. That would be what I would have said before I had my ancestry done. You know what? I'm Finnish. And then that other stuff. Finnish, Finland. Who knew? I'm 25%, 26% Finnish. I had no idea. Then you got your, England and Scotland and a little bit of France tossed in and a little bit of Spain tossed in and even some Italian. I definitely don't look Italian. But anyway, so that's the DNA. It's my genes. Well, they're made up of a different kind of a macromolecule. And guess what? They consist of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Yeah. So they're the most complex, or in terms of the chemistry, of the biological macromolecules. They're made up of nucleotides, and maybe you've heard of the A's and T's and C's and G's that make up your DNA. Well, each one of these is the building block for the biggest molecules in your body. That's what we call the nucleotides. Yeah, I don't know why I'm blanking on that. But anyway, so that's what is make up our DNA. And between those four different kinds of macromolecules, you get me, and we get you, and any other living thing there is. That's what we're made of. All right, we're moving right along. We'll talk about cells very briefly on the next slide, and keep on trucking, as they say.